Caseus. Jedi Redeemed. Chapter 17.
No! No! Stop! Please, don't do this! Stop! Kill me instead! Don't do it!
Dotame smirked and walked over to the airlock controls. I'm afraid your pleas fall upon deaf ears, Caseus. Any last words to your apprentice? Caseus locked eyes with Liara as tears flowed down his cheeks.
Liara!
Caseus!
The airlock was jettisoned as Liara was sent out into space. The air rushed from her lungs as she clutched at her neck, spinning violently further away from the ship. The gas had worn off enough for her to reach to her belt in desperation. She quickly attached her rebreather, taking in the precious oxygen. She began to panic. Her mind was hazy. She wouldn't survive long. She had to focus. She would die if she didn't. Steadying herself, she saw the Nebulous, still docked to Dotame's ship. It was her only chance. Calling out with the Force, she pulled herself towards it. Her rebreather was supplying oxygen, but she could feel her mind growing foggy and her skin growing colder and colder. The seconds felt like hours as her hand touched the hull of the Nebulous. Just then, she felt the ship detach, jogging her loose as she held on with one hand. The exertion was killing her as she held onto the Nebulous and clutched and clawed to the entrance ramp and crawled inside. Her vision started to fade as she reached for the switch to seal the ship and pressurize the inside. Just as she passed out, her hand hit the switch, sealing the door as pressure quickly returned to the Nebulous. Liara's head collapsed onto the cold metal floor as her labored breathing slowed, and she saw nothing but blackness. The Nebulous began to drift, alone, with no captain, low on power, and without anyone knowing where it was. Just a few minutes after Dotame's ship left, another ship approached, exiting hyperspace. An Imperial Star Destroyer. On board the bridge, the captain approached the navigation crew.
This is the ship that was seen leaving Bakura. It matches the description, sir. The craft appears to be unmanned. Attach a tractor beam at once. We will see how unmanned it is. Yes, Captain.
The Star Destroyer approached and began to reel in the Nebulous. Soon, the craft was brought into the hangar as a garrison of stormtroopers arrived, aiming their weapons as the captain approached.
On behalf of the Galactic Empire, step out of your ship with your hands up. You are surrounded.
There was no response from the craft.
I said come out!
Again, there was only silence.
Breach the door!
Two engineers arrived with plasma torches and began to slice through the door. Once the door was opened, the captain signaled to the stormtroopers who rushed in.
We have a passenger. Status?
The stormtrooper knelt down and felt for a pulse. It was weak, practically non-existent. It was there, though.
Alive. Injured. Bring them out.
Liara was dragged by her arms out onto the ramp as the officer looked closely at her.
Get her to the medical bay. Immediately. I must contact Lord Vader.
What about the ship?
Jettison it. It serves no purpose.
Liara was hauled away, lost, adrift in the darkness of her unconscious mind.
Status? Vitals are maintaining. No sign of brain activity. Chances are, if she hasn't woken up by now, she never will. Perhaps it's for the best. We should discuss letting her pass. She's of no use to us as is. Sir, I'm picking up a spike in brain activity.
Inside of a Bacta tank, Liara found herself floating as she stared out at a group of unfamiliar faces. These weren't rebels. It wasn't until she saw the emblem of the Empire on one of the data screens that her worst fears had come to fruition. As Liara looked around, one of the scientists walked over.
Awake, are we? Good. We were beginning to think you weren't going to pull through. Now, why don't we get you out of there and you can tell us what we need to know?
Liara's heart raced as she saw two metal hooks reaching towards her to hoist her out. Quickly, Liara ripped off her oxygen mask and sent out a force repulse outwards, shattering the tank and flooding the floor with a wave of Bacta.
Stop her!
Liara stood uneasily as one of the scientists approached with a syringe. Grabbing his arm, Liara forced the syringe into his own neck as he dropped immediately. As the other scientist approached, she reached down and grabbed one of the oxygen tubes and detached it, lashing it out like a whip and making quick work of the other scientists. As she ran over, she rummaged through the uniform of the lead scientist and found a blaster pistol. Quickly throwing on a medical robe, Liara made her way to the door, her mind groggy and her muscles weak. As she ran out the door, she heard an alarm blare. She had to run and get to the hangar. As she ran, tired and staggered, she encountered two stormtroopers who aimed their rifles. Ducking behind a gonk droid, Liara fired and hit one of them in the chest before peeking out and firing again as the other two took cover. With one fast shot to the gut, Liara took out the second and continued to run. Over the intercom, Liara heard an officer shouting orders.
Attention! Security personnel to level 12A. I repeat, security personnel to level 12A. We have an escaped prisoner on board. She is armed and dangerous. She must be stopped.
Liara ran faster. Up ahead, she could see a security door and writing above directing to the hangar. She was close. Just as she reached the security door, it opened, and Liara fell back in fear as her gaze met that of Darth Vader. Liara panicked and ran back the other way, only for Vader to raise his hand and shut the blast doors in front of her, trapping her. Aiming the blaster, she fired as Vader held out his hand and absorbed the oncoming blaster shots before pulling the blaster from her hand and crushing it. Trying desperately to create space between them, Liara sent out a force push at Vader. It hardly staggered him as he stepped closer and grabbed her neck, hoisting her in the air.
Submit.
Liara gasped for breath and clawed at his arm, but Vader's grip only tightened before she began to black out, and Vader threw her to the wall, knocking her out cold. When she awoke, her head was pounding. She was strapped to a table, unable to move even an inch. She writhed and started to breathe heavily. She was scared. Caseus was gone. She was alone. The door to the room suddenly opened as the table tilted upward to face the incoming visitor. Vader entered, alongside two stormtroopers and an interrogator probe. Liara gazed upon the horrifying form of Vader in terror as he gestured to the stormtroopers beside him. Nodding, they went to either side of Liara and stood at attention. No one said a word. It was dead quiet, save for the mechanical breathing coming from Vader.
You were on Bakura during the uprising at Tanbin Palace.
Liara shuddered at the sound of his voice.
Where is Caseus Urshon?
Liara shook.
I don't know who you're talking about.
You would lie to me.
Even if I knew something, I'd never tell you.
Vader stepped closer.
Where is Caseus Urshon?
I don't know him.
Vader signaled to the interrogation droid as it floated towards her, a syringe sticking out from one of its appendages. Liara squirmed as the needle entered her neck and injected her with something. Within seconds, it felt like her blood was boiling. She winced and cried as she clenched her fist tightly. Vader spoke again.
Your loyalty to your master is misplaced. Tell me what you know.
Liara struggled and cried out, but clenched her teeth and glared at Vader.
I don't know anything.
We shall see.
Liara suddenly felt a sharp blade drag across her neck, cutting the skin and dragging up her chin across her cheek. As she cried and winced, she could feel warm blood trickle down her face and onto the floor.
Your pain will endure as long as your will.
The droid began to cut across her face and cheek and over the bridge of her nose, slowly cutting deeper. Liara wanted to break. She wanted to scream and tell everything. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Anything she told him would endanger Caseus. The cutting soon stopped as Liara writhed.
This ends only when you tell me what I want to know.
Liara gritted her teeth and shut her eyes.
Never! Never!
Vader gestured to the stormtroopers as one of them grabbed a bottle of liquid and poured it over the cuts on her face. Liara screamed. It felt like acid were being poured on her. She struggled against the restraints and tried to kick and throw her fists, but all she could do was stay strapped to the table and endure. An hour went by. Liara had nearly passed out from the pain several times. Still, she said nothing.
Your resistance is impressive, young one. Your master has trained you well.
Liara seethed in pain, fear, and anger.
No matter. One way or another, you will break.
Vader signaled to the probe again as it approached. Liara groaned and stared at Vader.
I won't tell you anything. I'm not a traitor. Like you.
The air went ice cold as Vader stepped closer to Liara and activated his lightsaber, holding it above her neck, so close that she could smell the plasma emitting from the blade. Suddenly, Vader shut off his weapon and walked to the door.
Up the dosage. Report back to me if she speaks.
Vader left the room as the droid moved closer. Vader made his way through the halls of the Executor and to his private chamber, where he entered a command code into a terminal and knelt upon a holopad. Within a few moments, the dark form of his master appeared on the hologram.
Yes, my friend.
The girl's will is strong, my master.
And why does this matter concern me, Lord Vader?
She possesses knowledge of 2 surviving Jedi, one of whom I have encountered twice before. The Jedi from Castellon.
Are you certain of this?
Yes, my master.
Then you must break her, Lord Vader. Torture of the body will only achieve so much. To truly crush her will, you must attack that which drives her.
Her compassion.
A Jedi's greatest weakness. Their selfless devotion to others. You will break her spirit, and when you do...
She will reveal everything.
Precisely, my apprentice. Go now. Report to me with what you uncover.
Yes, my master.
The hologram faded as Vader stood and looked out of the viewport into the blackness of space. Days went by. Liara endured worse and worse torture at the hands of the Empire. Her spirit began to break. But still, she said nothing. As she sat strapped to the table amongst countless tools and torture implements, the door opened, and Liara was pulled by 2 stormtroopers from the table and restrained. Her mind was a haze as she was dragged to a large metal room and tossed into a cell as ray shields closed around her. As she sat up in pain, the door opened, and Vader stepped in and approached her cell.
My patience wears thin. I offer one more chance. Where is your master?
Liara glared at Vader in silence. Vader stared back before gesturing to the door as a group of stormtroopers entered the room, hauling behind them a group of 12 prisoners, men, women, and a young boy no older than 15. Liara looked at them in fear and confusion as Vader turned to her.
These rebel prisoners have been slated for execution. Should you tell me what you know, they will be spared.
Liara looked out at the terrified prisoners as they huddled together, facing down a squad of stormtroopers who aimed their weapons.
If you will not speak, they will die.
No! You can't do this!
Vader looked to his troops.
Execute the first 2.
Liara barely had time to cry out before a man and a woman were instantly gunned down as the remaining prisoners shook and screamed before being shoved back into place.
Stop! Please!
Execute the next two.
The stormtroopers aimed at two of the women and fired, killing them as Liara struggled to stand.
Enough!
Vader turned to Liara before looking back to his men.
Again.
No!
Two more men were immediately shot as Liara seethed in rage, tears streaming down her scarred cheeks.
Stop this! Stop this right now! You can't do this!
Vader paid no mind to her as he looked to his troops.
Leave the boy. Kill the rest.
Liara screamed as the rest of the terrified prisoners were executed, leaving just the boy shaking in fear, crying. Vader walked over to him and raised his fist as the young man was hoisted from the ground, clutching at his throat. Vader reached to his belt and removed his lightsaber, activating the scarlet blade. Suddenly, he stopped as the room began to shake, and the lights flickered. Turning to the cell, Liara stood, her hands outstretched as the ray shield generators around her were shattered, freeing her. The troopers tried to apprehend her, but she called out with her anger and lifted them in the air, sending them flying back at the wall with great force, before turning her attention to Vader. Reaching out, she pulled Vader's saber from his grasp and ran towards him. Vader dropped the boy and stood still as Liara swung violently at him. Vader easily evaded every strike. Liara screeched in fury as she reeled back and stabbed forward, only for Vader to grab the boy with the Force and move him in front of Liara's strike as the blade plunged through the chest of the terrified boy. Liara's rage turned to shock as she dropped the weapon and fell back.
No! No! I'm sorry!
The boy said nothing as his lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling. Liara crawled over to the boy and held his body as she wept and shuddered. Vader reached out his hand to call his weapon back. The hilt of his saber flew towards his hand, but stopped as it stood motionless in the air for a moment, before flying back to Liara's outstretched hand as she slowly stood with her back to Vader. The dazed stormtroopers stood and stepped in front of Vader, weapons aimed at her. Vader stood back and thought for a moment.
Kill her.
The stormtroopers opened fire at Liara, who deflected every shot before rushing forward and using Vader's blade, decapitated 3 of them. Dodging blaster fire, she leapt over the group and pulled another forward before slashing him across his stomach and sending him flying into the others. Running forward to the downed soldiers, she cut through them, leaving one horrified trooper left. As the lone Imperial soldier stood and stared at her, pathetically holding out his blaster, he looked into the cold, merciless eyes of Liara as she sliced through his blaster and stabbed through his chest, pinning him to the wall as his body slid to the side, off the blade, and collapsed. Liara stood, shaking in rage as Vader called his weapon back to his hand.
So much hatred.
Liara stayed quiet, facing away from Vader as she clenched her fist so tight that her nails dug into her palms.
Your power is wasted defending your master.
Liara turned and glared at Vader.
It is because of your master that you are here.
That's not true!
I can sense your pain. You had a family once. You were happy, content. Then you met Caseus. And such is the way of the Jedi. He brought pain and turmoil with him. He took you from your home, from your mother.
Shut up!
You haven't seen her in so long, have you? For all you know, she could be dead.
Stop it!
Liara shook. His words echoed in her head. She knew he was lying, but his words, they seemed true.
If your master cared, he would be here right now, wouldn't he, Liara?
Liara dropped to her knees and clutched her head.
You joined with him because you had no choice. And as time went by, you were deceived into believing you could change the galaxy. Where has that path led you? Here, to me.
I won't listen to your lies. I'm a Jedi.
Vader used the Force to twist her head to face the bodies of the stormtroopers she killed, along with the dead prisoners and the boy.
You are no Jedi. Jedi do not act in anger. You allowed your rage to consume you. You failed to save these people, and you killed these soldiers in your hatred.
Liara teared up as she collapsed to the floor.
You have failed as a Jedi.
Liara shivered in pain, fear, anger, and hate.
But you may still make a true difference. I have use for someone with your skill.
Liara looked up at Vader.
The Jedi failed the galaxy, and the rebellion insurgency brings only destruction and conflict. Thousands have already perished fighting, but you can help put an end to all of it. Pledge your service to me. I will train you and show you the true nature of the Force.
Liara slowly looked over at the bodies littering the floor, and in her mind, she felt something. Anger towards Vader, the Empire, but also towards Caseus. Vader was right. Ever since she met Caseus, her life had been nothing but hardship and turmoil. And the stronger she got, the more she wanted to be an asset to the Alliance, the more he pushed back, repressed her. She was capable of so much more, and yet he held her back. Liara slowly knelt towards Vader.
We were ambushed. I was left in space to die. I don't know where they took him.
Vader stood, towering over Liara.
Search your feelings. Do you believe him to be dead?
Liara shuddered and closed her eyes.
No.
He's alive, and yet you are here. Caseus fears me. Even with you at my mercy, he has chosen to hide. He has abandoned you.
With every word from Vader, Liara's heart grew darker.
I will do your bidding.
Vader crossed his arms.
Then I will teach you what he could not. You will do as I say and carry out the missions I give to you. And when the time comes, you will find him and exact your revenge.
Liara sat for a moment, her mind clouded with anger and sadness. But she accepted it and embraced it.
Yes, Master.
Months would pass. Every day was torture, training far more intense than Liara had ever imagined. Every day, her hatred grew with her strength. Vader would observe her growth. As impressive as she was, Liara meant nothing to him. She was simply a tool. It would only be a matter of time before Caseus would be found. When that day came, he would kill them both. Liara's training was pain, pressure, anger, and aggression. Vader would pit her against a multitude of threats, including assassin droids, deadly creatures, and even himself on occasion. A year had passed already, and Liara slept in her chamber, recuperating from the day of training and missions at Vader's behest. As she slept, she was plagued by visions of Korriban. It called to her. The following day, Liara stood before Vader in his chamber.
Master, I've had dreams the past few nights. Visions.
Vader sat and looked at her.
What have you seen?
A place I felt a strong pull to the dark side. Korriban.
The Force calls you there. Head to my shuttle. We will depart at once.
Liara bowed and left for Vader's shuttle. Soon, Vader would arrive with his pilots, and the two were flown into the Outer Rim. Upon arriving on Korriban, Vader looked to Liara.
Go. Find what it is you seek and report back to me.
Liara bowed and lifted her hood over her face as she walked down through the vast, empty canyons and into the Valley of the Dark Lords. She remembered how terrified she was when she was here with Caseus. Not anymore. She soon came upon the tall, pyramid-shaped structure she had been drawn to before. This is what called to her. Slowly, she made her way up the steps and into the temple. There, just like she remembered, at the far end, sitting on a pedestal, was a glowing purple crystal. She reached out, hearing whispers and voices in her ears speaking to her in languages she had no knowledge of. Then, she took it. The whispers stopped. Liara opened her eyes and gazed at the crystal, clutching it in her fist. She knelt and removed her lightsaber from her belt, a saber given to her by Vader as a weapon to use against enemies of the Empire. Closing her eyes, she disassembled her saber and removed the red crystal, replacing it with the amethyst one. Slowly, she reassembled it and stood, activating the new blade that shone with a vibrant, violent light and radiated with an eerie hum. As she looked upon it, she smiled and returned to her dark master.